Hi, you're right there. Welcome to another episode of 26 Minutes. And on this episode, we have a lovely chap from Twitter who I met on there named Adam Fair. So it's 26 Minutes with Adam Fair. And Adam has kindly come onto the podcast today to talk about ED, which is eating disorders. Now, to me, this is something new. I've never come across this, so this is an educational experience for me, and I hope for yourselves as well. But I'd like to welcome Adam on. Adam, if you'd like to introduce yourself properly and tell us a little bit about ED, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name's Adam Fair. I'm 24. I was 24 last week, so just turned 24, and I am currently living in Milton Keynes for work. I'm originally from Cumbria. You can probably notice from the accent I've got. So I've had my eating disorder since I was about 12 years old. So since I started secondary school, really. So half my life now, which is quite a long time. It all started for me with a physical condition. So I got a really bad food poisoning bug when I was away on holiday, just after I finished primary school. And before that, I was completely normal. I mean, I did notice that I was body checking quite a lot. I was quite aware of how I looked. I was doing a lot of sport at the time, but it never really affected me or affected what I ate until that time. And after that, I started noticing what I was eating a lot more. And over that summer period, it did descend into disordered eating. And then just after I started secondary school, the first weekend, I said to my mum, I'm not having that meal, and that sort of triggered the whole eating disorder. So I went through a lot of years of, well, I went through the first couple of months of primary school, sort of very, very reclusive, lost a lot of my confidence, went downhill very quickly, lost a lot of weight, even though eating disorders aren't all about weight. I didn't lose weight initially. I eventually lost quite a lot of weight because of the restricted intake. And many times I refused to go to school. When I was playing up, deliberately hurting myself to try and get out of school. And it sounds really sort of over the top, if you like, but that's sort of how it was. I was sort of going back into my shell, going completely against what everything I stood for, really, and everything I was. And that carried on for quite a long time until I went on holiday over the Christmas period, and that sort of brought me back to some sort of stability, if you like. But then I went through 3 or 4 years of what I call purgatory, where I never really got anywhere. I was in sort of that pseudo recovery stage. So I was never sort of well enough to progress, but I was never bad enough to access treatment. A big problem with eating disorders is if you're not under a certain weight, then they will not treat you a lot of the time. A lot of services don't cater for people who aren't underweight, even though less than 10% of people with eating disorders are underweight. It's a massive stigma that's against eating disorders. During that time, I didn't grow. So it took me, I think it was 3 or 4 years, but I wasn't growing. I was the tallest in the year when I joined secondary school. By age 15, I was the smallest, still like I was 11 years old. Now, what brought me back to sort of some sort of recovery, if you like, was I started playing football again. I found that love for football again. I started playing for the teams I used to play for before I was 11 or 12, sorry. And that brought me back to some sort of normality, and that really did kickstart things. So I started eating better, started nourishing my body better, still not perfectly, and I still had a lot of food rules. So my mindset wasn't perfect, but my body was reacting to the increased intake and the fact I was playing sport and enjoying my life again, if you like, which was really nice and a really good time. I ended up, after 2 years playing semi-professionally football-wise, which was really, really good. And that was until sort of the end of age 16, until I started sixth form.
Okay.
And then when I started sixth form, it all went downhill again. I broke my foot. I broke my foot very early on, and I couldn't walk and eat because I was on crutches, obviously. And my friends left me, so I had to dump my lunch one day, and that triggered the next episode of eating disorder, which then sent me downhill on a downward spiral for the next 2 years, all the way through A levels. During this time, the bowel condition that I had got worse, progressively worse. So I had to have a few operations on it as well, which wasn't helpful at that time because when you get operations on your inside, you can't then eat afterwards, and that sort of gave me excuses again. Also during that time, I started developing exercise addiction. So I got compulsively exercising. I had to go on so many walks a day, do so many steps. Again, I won't use numbers because it's not helpful for anyone to do that, but it was obsessive, and it's the mindset that's important. And by the time I ended up going to uni, so I did really well in my levels. Somehow I put myself into, the nth degree, ended up getting 100% in a couple of my A levels and nearly in the rest of them. So it was people on the outside might think I was doing fine, but inside I was literally dying. And by the time I went to university, the last thing my parents said when they left me is said, "Let us know when you're ready to come home," because I was so unwell. But I never got treatment, and that was the thing. I never got treatment because I was never unwell enough. So during the time,
according to who?
according to basically everywhere I went, which was really, really off-putting and annoying and invalidating, to be honest, because my parents took me all around the country, literally, to hospitals to try and get me some help. And everywhere I went, they just said, "You're not X weight, your BMI is not low enough, and your bloods aren't off at the moment, so we can't treat you." And that just continued and continued and continued, no matter what happened. I also managed, when I was in the denial phase, I also managed to persuade a CAMS psychologist that I didn't have an eating disorder within 2 minutes, even though I was rapidly declining mentally and physically. But after 3 months of university, just less than 3 months of university, I ended up almost forcing myself to get to that BMI number because I knew I just couldn't carry on. Now, for a lot of people, that BMI number, actually, if you look at people getting treated for eating disorders, that was still quite a high weight, which is really wrong, completely wrong. But for me, it was so bad that my heart was close to stopping, my kidneys were failing. And if it had been left any longer, literally another day, I probably wouldn't be here anymore. Even at that time, A&E were going to discharge me and give me an urgent appointment for 3 days' time. Urgent, whatever that is. So
doesn't seem very urgent, does it? 3 days.
No. And then when I was admitted to hospital, so my parents took me back home. I was admitted to hospital. They then put me on a feeding plan, which wasn't taking into account that you can get what's called refeeding syndrome with eating disorders. So if you've eaten a very little and then you suddenly eat a lot, it can actually kill you as well. Puts all your metabolism out of order. It puts your blood composition out of order as well. It can actually be fatal.
And I can imagine that could be, because I know when I've had a long day and I skip a few meals and then I try eating, my eyes are a lot bigger than my belly. My portions are big, but what I'm actually intaking from that is very small because your stomach shrinks, doesn't it? The less you eat, it shrinks. So I can imagine if you're doing that and then you go back to eating, what we would call a normal portion-sized meal, that, your stomach is really at a point where, I don't know, could it kind of explode? I don't.
No, it doesn't go that far. What happens is essentially it just makes all your chemicals out of whack inside.
Okay.
It's very common in African countries where there's a lot of famine, and people go and they feed them food, and that's a really kind thing to do, obviously. But actually, it can be very, very dangerous.
Okay.
And refeeding syndrome is something to definitely for advice to anyone, have a look on it, because you can't people just say just start eating when you feel like you're ready to do that, and it has to be when it's the right time for the person as well. You can't just tell them to just eat. It doesn't work. All the time I was ill and still am struggling now, people tell me to eat more. I know I need to eat more. I know that, but I cannot do that. It's the same with people who have binge eating disorder and bulimia. You can't just stop doing something. You have to be ready to do it. You have to work with a professional to help you do that as well.
Yeah. How does it make you feel when people are telling you that you have to eat more, even though you have to, but you're getting it from all angles, and it's very easy from an outside perspective. Oh, just go on, just have another sausage, have another bite of your burger. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel, well, it depends who's saying it. To be honest, if it's someone that I love and that cares about me, I'm receptive to that, even though normally I won't act on it because I know it's one of them things that everyone does it. Everyone has that thing they're in denial with. And for me, it was my eating disorder a lot of the time, and still is in the back of my head. It's very manipulative, and I say it as a sort of, it's part of my brain, but it isn't part of my brain. So
Yeah.
it causes that intense anxiety around food, even to the extent it's not just a burger or a sausage. It's even if I've got a meal plan, even if you gave me an apple on top of my meal plan, it'll be
Yeah.
like, you'd freak out.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult. And when people just say eat more, it's almost like an insult, and it's like telling a kid not to do something. They're gonna want to do it. It's the opposite of that. It's almost like you've got to encourage someone to work with them, to work through it. And that's where professional help is sometimes better than family and friends, because family and friends put emotion into it.
Yeah.
Whereas what you need
Yeah.
is that emotion to be taken out of it
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's a very difficult one, and there's a lot of stigma still in eating disorders that I'm not. People like me with, I've got what's classed as atypical anorexia now because I'm not underweight, right? Anorexia itself is classed as underweight. Less than 10% of people are underweight. A lot of them are of normal weight, and some of them are actually in larger bodies as well. And the last thing to do with someone with an eating disorder in a larger body is tell them to go on a diet or restrict. No one should do that anyway.
Yeah.
And it's proven that 25% of dieters develop eating disorders, and there's a lot of statistics out there about how dangerous it is to have a restrictive diet anyway, even if you're normal or if you haven't got an eating disorder. But it's very difficult when someone tries to lecture you about something. Like a lot of people with eating disorders are very aware of their condition.
Yeah.
It's just they are almost consumed by it, and it's become so habitual that it's very hard to come out of that, if that makes sense. And there's also a big link between eating disorders and autism as well, which is that habitual side of things.
Okay. Yeah. So my boy, he's coming up to 5. He has autism, and he's very picky on his foods, like extremely picky on his foods. And it's kind of each day he has to, his dinners are set. He'll have a choice between 3 different kinds of dinner. And all of a sudden he could knock one of them straight out. And that will no longer be in his diet anymore. Just for a simple reason. It could even be a very simple reason, is that maybe I've served the food up a little bit too hot and he's burnt his lip on it. That now makes that experience that every time that he's going to eat that something could happen to him that he's not going to like. So now that is completely out of his food plan. So we try to make sure, that everything is set out. There's certain things that can't go near the beans and everything. There's no juice that's allowed near that. The gravy can only go on top. It can't drip down the side. The gravy has to sit on top. So he's very particular with certain food. So we try to be very, very careful with how his food is presented, to how warm it is, because if he keeps knocking off things from his food plan, there's not going to be much left. I can't ever see him knocking off crisps. He absolutely loves his crisps. So, but I don't want him to live on that all the time. But so just picking up on something you said before. So it when your eating disorder went back and started when you was 12. Was your parents or anyone aware around that time? They caught onto it pretty quickly, did they?
They caught onto it immediately. They literally, within 3 days of me saying I'm not eating, they took me to the doctors, to the GP. Now the GP quite flippantly said you've got an eating disorder, and then told me to go away, which was helpful.
This is what you have. Get out my office, basically.
Yeah. So my parents were, I wouldn't be here without them, because they supported me right through everything. They've got medical knowledge themselves, luckily, which is why when I got admitted to hospital and in A&E and they said to come back from an urgent appointment, Dad said no, do his bloods, and that's when they noticed that everything was failing. So without them I literally wouldn't be here. But they knew right from the start that I was struggling, and they felt as powerless as anyone else did, I think, to be able to help me out, because they tried absolutely everything. And even when I did get the crisis care after I left hospital, my parents came with me to the first appointment. And the first appointment, the crisis team said, "Oh well, something must have gone wrong when you were younger." And in front of me and my mum, which is probably the most insulting thing you can say to someone who has a very, very loving relationship with the parents.
Yeah.
So that was the end of that relationship with the crisis team, which was the time I was most receptive to care because I was the most unwell. So that then started 6 months of nothing. They'd never had a man with an eating disorder either, which didn't help. So they didn't know what to do with me, and they said that to me many times. We don't know what to do with you because you're a man. And then after 6 months, I discharged myself because I was still being audited. In terms of audited, they never started any treatment because they didn't know where to categorize me, which was always helpful. So that started 3 years of pseudo doing nothing again, and I had to, by which time I'll add that my it sounds a bit disgusting, but my bowels are completely prolapsed, and I'm only saying that because that is quite a common thing with eating disorders, which is unknown. What happens is your gut motility stops and slows down so much that it can really affect your bowels. And because I already had a condition, it infected mine so much that my whole bowels had collapsed and prolapsed out. You see it quite severely with you see the weightlifters who have it, and it looks horrible. It's like that, but not quite as instant as that, if that makes sense. So I had to have 2 surgeries on that, and it didn't work. Neither surgery worked. When I was 21, I ended up having to have a colostomy bag, which I have now permanently for the rest of my life. So that is directly caused by the eating disorder. So it's not just, people think that the effects aren't permanent. They are, or can be. I also have no testosterone naturally now, and that may never reverse as well. So I have to supplement that. Luckily, I can supplement that, but I've never fully developed to my adult development, and I'll never grow to my full height. I was meant to be 6'2", and I'm 5'10". It gets a bit annoying because I was like, I'd like to be a bit taller.
But, well, don't worry, I'm 5'4" or 5'5", so I'm really sure. So obviously it's been a very, very long journey for you, and you're not at the end yet. So over the years, this has probably had a very powerful effect on your well-being, on your mental health. So what has your journey with the mental health been along with that? Have you found yourself in really bad places, isolated? And have you been on to seek help for that as well, or have you just been concentrating on seeking help for ED?
Yeah, so I have. When it all started, obviously the isolation started very quickly, and I reclused myself completely from everyone for 3 or 4 months. That was very, very difficult time in my life. And I look back now, and I spent lunchtime standing in the corridors, just standing there doing nothing, and it was awful time. I was in a very low place, but I was never suicidal or anything then, because I wasn't suicidal, but I just wanted everything to stop. I couldn't cope with life, which is why I just wanted to stay away from everyone. Now that did get better as I progressed through the next few years, but then when it got worse again, my well-being got a lot worse. And then between the ages of 18 and 21, where I wasn't working for 3 years, that did hit me a lot, because I was struggling with my stomach condition. I was struggling with my eating disorder. I wasn't progressing, and I felt like I had nothing to live for. Now I did seek help during that time, but again, it was sort of just, we'll give you 6 sessions of CBT and send you on your way. And now, when you've been through a lot of trauma, and eating disorders are a trauma, I also went through a lot of trauma in other ways. So when I was 13, between the age of 13 and 15, I went through a stage where I was psychologically abused by someone that, well, it was classed as sexual abuse, but it was psychological abuse, if that makes sense. It was never anything physical. With someone who I knew, a friend, or so-called friend, who was at the time a teacher and then went on to be a policeman, which didn't end up very well. That was a lot of trauma for me. Obviously, having the physical conditions as well was a trauma. Losing a lot of friends. So I've now got really bad post-traumatic stress disorder. The only treatment there was is, we'll give you 6 sessions of CBT, and they still do that to this day. We'll give you 6 sessions of CBT, but we know what you really need though, which is X therapy. But the NHS doesn't do that, so you'd have to pay for it, and I'm not in the position where I can afford that at the moment.
No,
So
yeah,
it's sort of
it's quite
in
costly,
limbo.
isn't it? So what is
You're in limbo,
CBT?
yeah.
What's CBT?
CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. Now it's, in all honesty, I don't think it will be something that works for me, and it doesn't work for everyone. It's a process whereby you work with a therapist or a counselor, and they don't change how you think, but they help change your outlook on the emotions you have. So it's not about not feeling scared or upset or angry or sad, because all those emotions are completely normal, and every emotion is normal, as we all know. And you should never feel ashamed to feel an emotion. What it's about is trying to rationalize that emotion and look at it in a more positive light. So not change how you think, but change the way you think about how you think. Don't see it as a negative.
Yep. Okay. Right. Okay. So I heard you mention there that you don't think it's going to work for you, but you're still trying it. You're still going to proceed, and you're still going to kind of explore all avenues, which really shows a commitment in yourself that you're very open to change for the better for your own health, really, which is a fantastic thing. So, have you tried many things in the past? You're on CBT now, on doing this. Have there been other methods that have been useful, or other ones that you haven't really found that useful as well in the past?
It's difficult with eating disorders, especially. You have spells where you're very, very receptive to help, and spells where you're not. It's probably the same with a lot of mental health conditions, illnesses, however you want to describe them. It's when you're receptive, you are receptive, and you do make progress. And that progress can also be, for me with my eating disorder, for example, I go through spells where I can eat more and I can manage my exercise a lot better, which I'm doing at the moment as well. I'm not necessarily eating as well as I could be, but the exercise wise is getting a lot better.
Yep.
Now that's a receptive phase, and you go through ups and downs like anyone does on the road to recovery. I've never been given formalized help until now, really, and that's more a failing of the system, I'd say, because I've been receptive many times, but after 6 months on a waiting list, that receptiveness can wane, and I think that's natural for anyone. You have spells where you're a lot more hopeful and spells where you're not. The thing that's changed at this time is I now have a future for myself, and that sounds really bad, that saying I didn't have that before, but I now feel
You
like
can
I've
see
got
the
that.
future now. Yeah, you can
Yeah,
see there is something there for you.
I've got a full-time job. I'm working in a team that's very helpful. I've got a clear progression path for the future, and I want to be there for that future now, which is a complete step change from when I was, minutes away from ending my life. So, it's very a massive change, but a change positively, which has made me a bit more receptive to wanting to recover.
Yeah. Excellent. So work and colleagues, they're all aware of your journey with ED. Yeah. And it's great that you can have the support from colleagues and your bosses. It makes a complete difference to know that you are going into somewhere which that we'll call the safe space, where you are not judged, where you do have the support. And, if you are having a day or a week or a month where things are very, very tough, that you have that love and support of the people around you, and that when they ask you things, and when they give you new methods or suggestions, that it's coming from a loving place, because they're there all the time for you. Now, I do remember seeing, I think it was last week actually, or the week before, you took a very big positive step to actually go out and have a meal with someone, an old friend, I believe it was.
A work colleague, actually.
Okay, right, a work colleague. See, there you go. So they kind of understand, and you've gone out, and it looked delicious, to be honest. Did it?
It was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how much of a big step for you personally was that?
Absolutely huge, to be honest. That was the first time I've been out for a meal with non-family in about 2.5 years. Now that's one thing with a lot of eating disorders. It's very controlling. So eating things that you haven't made or you haven't cooked or you don't know the nutritional content of is very, very difficult. And especially if you haven't got that family support of it, it's just on your own. And I organised that myself. So it was a massive step.
Wow.
but also not to restrict the rest of the day and to just spend the rest of the day as normal, which I did, is a huge step in the right direction. Now, a big saying that I have, and you probably saw it in the tweet, was that a meal doesn't mean recovery. You can't recover by eating one meal or having one good day, but every single meal you have is a step in the right direction, is a step towards recovery. And it's about choosing that step in every meal. And that's sort of how I work to help others now. And the thing with work and work colleagues, we have a really good setup in terms of wellbeing champions. I'm a lead of one of those at work, and we have such a good open culture at work, which is very, very lucky, because I don't think I'd still be able to work here if I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So yeah, going out for meals is a massive thing, and that can be for a lot of people. And I think people underestimate that sometimes, how big of a step that can be, and how hard it can be for some people to do that. And that when some people cancel plans, it's not because they don't want to do it, it's because they can't do it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just before we do go, obviously there are many people out there who are living with ED that they're hiding it. They're which is it must be very tough to walk that journey alone, hiding it from people. Why suffering from ED? What it does to them, I can only imagine, is pretty much mind-wrecking. So for anyone out there who may watch this video, do you have any advice for the people that are, let's say, suffering in silence?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is you're not alone. There's literally millions of people who are in the same position as you, a lot more than even the statistics believe. Male, female, of all genders, all ages, all ethnicities. It's huge. And just because you're not underweight, it doesn't mean you're not struggling. You can have an eating disorder at any weight, and it's not just anorexia that is an eating disorder, or bulimia, or even binge eating disorder. There's so many different types. It's a mental health illness first and foremost, but does change the physiology of your body as well. Now, my message is, it's sort of a double-edged sword. I would always say, be honest with people around you, be honest with your loved ones that you're struggling, and educate yourself as well about it, because that does really help get an insight, and also try to help educate the people you love about it as well, because people can be very naive to eating disorders still. Say it's like a phase, or you'll grow out of it and things like that. It's very, very common to say that. And especially with men, and people can think that exercise, for example, is and women, but exercise is a really positive thing, but it can be done to the point of obsession, and that can become very unhealthy as well. Now, I would also say try and seek help if you're struggling. There's massive evidence that early intervention is a huge help in terms of quick recovery and not having any lifelong mental or physical damage due to it. Now, the difficulty there is currently services are very stretched and under-resourced, and this is a failing of many years of underfunding and under-resourcing of services, that they unfortunately still do classify people, or a lot of them do anyway, in terms of their weight, or their sort of, they have to fit set criteria, which is wrong. Now, that should not stop you trying to get help and pushing for it, because if you push hard enough, you will eventually get that help. But it can be very demoralizing, but don't give up. And last thing I'll say is recovery is possible. And even if you're not fully recovered, look at, I'm now in a full-time job. I've been so for 3 years. I'm doing really well. In terms of that side of things, you can, even though you're struggling, you can still live with an eating disorder and still succeed in other areas of life. It's not a life sentence. It's not a death sentence. It's not anything like that. And if you work hard enough, and recovery has to come from within, right? If you work hard enough with the right support, then recovery is always possible, and never give up on it.
Excellent. Well, look, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure, very educational for myself. But if there is anyone out there, who is living with an eating disorder, again, I would suggest come in and follow Adam on Twitter. I'll leave his Twitter on the bottom. Adam posts very regularly, very informative stuff, and personal stuff as well. So, if you're not ready to talk out just yet, I suggest that you do go and follow Adam and just follow his journey and watch his progress at the same time. But Adam, as I said, it's been an absolute pleasure coming on today, and I'm sure we'll catch up very, very soon.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for watching.
No problem.